Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Andrew Wilder. Andrew is the retained Chief Security Officer at Community Veterinary Partners. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Sure. So as I know we're doing a podcast related to, entry into the cybersecurity field, I figured I'd give a little bit more background than I normally do. So one of the first jobs that I had out of school was at a paper company. And my title was customer service rep. And because it was a small company, I ended up doing everything. I did sales and marketing. I did inventory. I did finance. When we get really busy, I'd go in the warehouse and I'd pick pallets with the forklift and put them on the truck. So I knew the whole business from beginning to end. So one day, the owner of the company comes to me and he says, "Hey, Andrew," he says, "we're going to replace that old mainframe system with Windows servers and Windows workstations." And to date myself, clearly it was Windows NT servers and Windows 95 workstations. So you can do the math there. And I said, "That sounds like a really great idea." And he said, "Well, you're the youngest guy, so you get to do it." And I said, "Okay." So for the next 2 or 3 months, I worked nights and weekends. I did all the data conversion by hand. And one day we go live with the system and stuff breaks and I'm able to fix it. And it's such a satisfying day in my very young career. And I have this moment of reflection. I realized hey, maybe I should do this IT thing as a career. So I saved up money, I saved up some PTO time, and I took a 2-week Microsoft boot camp in Chicago, and in the middle of winter, by the way. And I took 7 Microsoft exams during this boot camp, and I passed all of them, and I came home with this MCSE certification. And if you remember in the early 2000s, this MCSE thing was like resume gold, right? So I put my resume out all over the country. I got picked up doing a cybersecurity role for Bank of America in Atlanta, Georgia. So moved across the country, started doing that, and then kept doing consulting roles with HP for a while. One of them was with Nestle, the food company, and I ended up staying there. They gave me a great job, and I love the culture there. Stayed there for 18 years. When I left there, I was the regional CISO of Americas, Asia, and Europe. And then did a couple of other CISO roles that have led me into the retained CISO role that I have right now. So that's kind of my origin story with a little bit more background than usual.
Very cool. Do you think somebody could take the same path that you did today that you did back then?
Well, probably not the MCSE route, but I think there's a lot of different programs and opportunities today. I've talked to a number of people through apprenticeship programs that, hey, I'm a forklift driver or I'm a salesperson and I see this cybersecurity thing as a great career move. And so I think it's certainly possible to do it. Not exactly the same way I did it, but yeah, there's a way to pivot in your career and get into cyber for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. And I know when we kind of did our prep for this call, we talked about the idea of the talent bottleneck. And so we kind of have an entry-level hiring problem right now, and we need to try and figure out, how we might go about remediating that. But do you think that the talent gap is a real thing or not? And if so, or if not, what do you think it looks like? Or, I guess, could you describe your thoughts on that?
So I think the talent gap that we talk about regularly in the cybersecurity community is sort of blown out of proportion. I don't really think that there are 4 million open roles that we can't find people for. Now, I do think that there is a talent gap, but it's probably not as big as we think it is. I think the biggest challenge that we have is in entry-level jobs. Because if you look at quote-unquote entry-level jobs in cybersecurity, they want you to come in with experience. But how do you come into an entry-level job with experience? How do you get experience without a job, and how do you get a job without experience? So, there's a number of different things that you can do to try to build that up. But I think that is the biggest gap that we have, is bringing people in at the real entry level and then building up that talent internally.
For sure. Yeah, and I think we have kind of an expectation setting problem as well. There's a lot of, boot camps out there, degree programs, certification companies. Just basically, they're hawking their wares, and they have the right to sell their things. Of course, their whatever certification or piece of paper. But in doing so, I think they're setting the wrong expectations with the people flocking to get all of these credentials. And they end up thinking that, every entry-level security job pays over 100K, or there's all these unfilled positions. And so there's just all these jobs just waiting there. It's an untapped market when, the reality on the ground is there's just not that many entry-level jobs. Yeah. So, so I think I would put the number at tens of thousands of people trying to break into the field right now. And true entry-level jobs, even if you were to consider requiring a little bit of IT experience as entry-level for security, as people would say, which isn't a true entry-level job. Even if you're to, kind of group all of those together, I would imagine the number of those, and they're usually not out on the market, but they're probably a couple thousand at any given time. And we have tens of thousands of people. So any thoughts on how we can open up more of these jobs and build that business case to create these talent pipelines to move these people from the entry level where there's a proliferation of candidates to the senior level where we actually need the people to be?
Yeah, so I think you've asked probably three different questions in there, so I'll try and get to all three of them. But so one thing I think we should look at is hiring for potential, right? Cybersecurity skills can be learned on the job. And in fact, maybe the most valuable way to learn cybersecurity skills is on the job. So there are some things that are intrinsic, right? Work ethic is intrinsic. Potential is intrinsic. It's not things that you learn, it's something that you have. So if we hire for potential and we teach technical skills, that's a great way to build up. There's a couple of different methodologies that I've used that have been very successful for me. One is internships. Now, there are both paid and unpaid internships, but it's a great way to bring someone in, make them invaluable to the organization, right? You can't live without them anymore. Now, maybe they have to go off and leave the internship and graduate, but the next time you're thinking of bringing someone in entry level, you go, hey, remember Susie? She was our intern. She did a really good job. She already knows the team. She knows our processes. The next entry level job we have, let's go talk to Susie and see if she's interested. So internship is a great way. The other way that I've used successfully are apprenticeships. So people, and we talked about this a little bit before, people who are doing that career shift, right? And they've gotten into one of these programs, they've gotten certified, they're ready to go out and do something. You're able to bring people in for pennies on the dollar, or maybe 50 cents on the dollar, if you will, and they're hungry for this experience. And so you can bring them in, they're ready to do it. Normally, you can interview them first, so you can hire for potential in that same thing. But it's great to give these people an opportunity, and many times they turn into some of your more valuable resources on your team that are willing to take any kind of project or task that you throw out.
For sure. Yeah. And I can't stress enough how important it is to give people a shot, because once you give somebody a shot that nobody else is giving, you get almost unlimited loyalty out of that employee, which is so rare these days. You just don't see people sticking around for 18 plus years with a company anymore. I think that's kind of a larger problem with society right now. There's not as much investment in employees from the employer side. There's not as much investment in the employer from the employee side. So there's a lot of fear, I think, in hiring managers about how do we hold on to people or how do we invest in training people when we know that they're probably just going to turn around and, take the next job paying more. Any thoughts on that, how we might be able to remedy that situation?
So one of my retention plans or policies or what have you is exactly that. It's about training people. So, when I think about my job as a leader, it's two things. The first one is to provide a safe space for my team to succeed. There's a great quote from Steve Jobs. He says, we don't hire good people to tell them what to do. We hire good people to tell us what to do. So I'm there to create that safe space, make them successful. And that's removing roadblocks, right? Political roadblocks, financial roadblocks, skill, talent roadblocks, getting that stuff. The second area is helping the team to advance in their career. So I think if you have a fear about training someone that they're going to leave, I think you need to get past that fear. I think if you're not constantly training your team, they will become obsolete. And if they leave because of other reasons, well, that's okay. You need to have enough of a pipeline that you can be constantly training everybody on your team to get to that next level. I just finished the Elon Musk biography. I don't know if you've read it yet, Pete. He talks about this thing that he calls the algorithm. The algorithm is, I broken it down to QDSAA, which is question every requirement, delete any part of the process, simplify and optimize, accelerate cycle time, and automate. And if you follow those things, what you'll find yourself doing is you're pushing down lower value tasks and bringing up higher value tasks. And that's another retention plan. Because the more that you remove low value tasks from your team and give them more interesting and more challenging things to do, the more they're interested to stay and want to keep getting more interesting things. So a great way to push those low value tasks down and give people more reason to stay, if you will.
Yeah, that's great. And that's actually a pretty common thread that's come up in the podcast before. You find a way to create those sort of the grunt work, or you're able to identify that stuff that your senior people don't like doing, but it's an opportunity for the junior people to grow and in a way to justify hiring that person that's more junior. I think often folks will say, well, security is such a mission critical type of function that we really can't afford to bring in inexperienced people because it's the company's security at risk, How do you identify the tasks that can be delegated to those folks that aren't going to, risk your security posture?
Yeah, it's a good question and a challenge for sure. There's a guy named Rick Howard. Rick Howard used to be the CISO of Palo Alto Networks. He wrote a really excellent book called, I'm blanking on the name now. He's going to kill me for this. I know what it is. Give me a second. It's called Cybersecurity First Principles. And so really great book. Check that out, by the way. But he wrote, not necessarily as part of the book, but he wrote a white paper. And it's talking about, you remember that movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt? Where it's the Oakland A's and they have the lowest budget in Major League Baseball, and they're able to hire a team that gets on base. They use this tactic called Sabermetrics. So what Rick proposes is, and addressing that pipeline challenge that we talked about before, or the talent gap, he says, what if we use a Sabermetrics approach to hiring entry-level cybersecurity talent? And if you think about it, let's take the idea of vulnerability management, right? So your idea in vulnerability management is to reduce the number of easily exploitable vulns within your environment. And so your widget, your thing is, how many vulns can I get down per day, or can I eliminate per week, or whatever your thing is. And then you bring in entry-level people, and that's your goal. Okay, you need to get rid of 10 exploitable vulns per day, or whatever the number it is that you set. And so if you hire for that, you can train people up in that way, and that gives you a great way to look at entry-level talent and giving them a clear objective, and then helping them build up and then get into those higher levels as you need to. So I think that's a really interesting way of addressing that issue.
Yeah, I almost feel like the analogy or the way to do it would be kind of partition off a piece of work for them that isn't in, the production environment, where you're able to have them kind of experiment and figure things out, or, maybe do research and, bring things to you and then run them by the higher up to understand if it's worth pursuing or not. I think, to your point, there's ways of doing these things. You just have to get creative, and you have to maybe stop giving the first excuse that comes to mind and sit down and think about it. A lot of what I hear these days is we just don't have the budget. We don't have the manpower. We're running super lean already. The economy is suffering. Our team is small. We can't grow. We don't have headcount. What can you do in that environment where you're thinking about either training somebody junior or making sure that your existing employees aren't stretched too thin?
Well, that's a real challenge, right? I submitted a talk for RSA called Doing Less with Less. I think what you need to do there is look at where you are spending your resources. I talked about Rick's book. There's another one that I like by a guy named Roger Grimes called A Data-Driven Defense Model. And he gives a great analogy in that book where he talks about the way that we're using our resources today. So imagine that there's burglars that are breaking into your house and they keep breaking in through the windows. And your response is that you keep buying stronger and stronger locks for your front door, which doesn't do any good, but you're really investing in that way. So the data-driven defense model is to say, look, what are the attacks that have happened to me in the past, that are happening to us now? And what are the attacks that are happening to other businesses in my industry, in my geographic location, in my size of business, and to look at those things and spend your resources to reduce the probability of a significant cyber event based on those tactics to your organization. And if you're spending stuff doing other stuff, because I guarantee you there's going to be all these things coming in, your boss is calling you, the CFO read something about cybersecurity, what are we doing for this? If you're trying to address all of that other stuff, you're going to get burned. Go and focus on reducing those key risks that you have, and don't spend your time doing other stuff. Refocus those people to do something else, and that'll allow you to bring in that entry-level talent and give them, as you said, kind of those incremental things, shadowing, things like that to build people up.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the idea of the Pareto principle. Are you familiar?
Mm-hmm. Of course, yeah.
Where you spend a little bit of effort and you get a lot of results out of that little bit of effort versus doubling down on trying to do everything and spending 80% of your effort on 20% of your results. Being able to prioritize, I would imagine, is extremely important in that respect.
Priority is such an important topic that we don't talk about enough in cybersecurity. And, a lot of times when I talk to vendors and startups and they say, oh, well, the tool will prioritize it for you. I'm like, but how does it prioritize it? How do you know what the priority are? The priority my crown jewel systems? Are they the biggest exploits? Are they the biggest bang for the buck? There's all kinds of ways to prioritize things. So if you're not really clear on what is the priority for you and what is the priority for your business, you're going to do just like you said, the Pareto concept, spending 80% of your time on 20% of results. So go figure out what those priorities for are, and you might need to change your plan. You might need to change your roadmap, but that's okay. Roadmap is always changeable, right? It should be.
Yeah, and two, I get the sense that we're often as humans, and I hear this about security, distracted by the latest shiny object.
Yes.
It can help to focus on the fundamentals versus spending a lot of money on the big fancy tool or worried.
It's not all about tools. A lot of it is process, right? You got to get down to the details of the process and find the cybersecurity holes in the process and fix it that way. A lot of times the tools that you have may already be able to do that. And spending a bunch of money on a tool is not always the answer. Sometimes there's budget reasons that you spend money on a tool versus hiring people when you should do the opposite. But that's a business problem and not really a cyber problem.
Yeah, I know people don't, especially security technologists, they don't necessarily get very excited, I guess, about documentation. But I would imagine that's a great way to enable your junior folks as well. If you have everything documented, processes, procedures, how-to manuals and things like that, if all of that exists in your intranet or wherever your internal repository, you don't need to spend as much time hand-holding the juniors if you get that set up in the beginning.
Every intern, I'm really glad you brought that up. Every intern that I would bring in, they would go through the whole catalog of SOPs or standard routines, and their job, one of their jobs or objectives was to update them. So as you're learning to do this thing that is documented in there, if there's something that you need to ask questions about or wasn't clear to you, you go and update that documentation, and then you let us know what are the updates or changes that you made. But that's a great way to not only onboard people, but also make sure that they're contributing to improving that documentation for everybody.
Awesome. Yeah, and you mentioned in the junior folks, a lot of what you're looking for is going to be those intangibles, the grit and determination and passion for learning and things like that. How do you identify those sorts of things, especially when you think about the recruiting process? The recruiters are out there usually looking for hard skills, looking for things that are on the page. How do you, I guess, educate them or ensure that they're bringing you the right people?
Yeah, so that is a challenge. And, depending on the size of your organization, you probably don't have a dedicated cybersecurity HR partner, right? Or a recruiting team. You might have, if you're lucky enough in a big enough organization, you might have a dedicated recruiting team for IT, and that's great, and you can help to educate them. So first of all, I think you need to work hand in hand with your HR team and your recruiting team to help them understand how to do that. And then I think the other part of it is on you as the hiring manager to find ways to interview for soft skills or leadership skills or whatever you want to call it. Now, some technical acumen is going to be required, so you need to get those basics out of the way, but you need to start interviewing for potential. One of the ways that I do it is to ask questions that are not necessarily technical. Describe to me a really challenging problem that you have and how you solved it. Tell me about something that you're passionate about, and then help me to become passionate about the same thing. Tell me about your top strengths and then your top opportunities or weaknesses, because that helps you understand how well the person knows themselves. So those are some kind of not so technical questions that you can ask people and start to get a better understanding of who they are as a person and maybe how their ethic setup is and how their potential is.
Yeah, very cool. And you bring up a good point that really some of this stuff just needs to be sussed out in an interview. There's only so much you can see on a resume or on a LinkedIn profile. So you have to give, I guess, the recruiters a short list of hard skills to go look for. Often what I find is the job descriptions, what recruiters are tasked with finding, those lists are too long, and those people either don't exist, or if they do, they're extremely expensive. How do you distill down what hard skills somebody has to have just on day one for them to even be hireable in the first place, even if they have the right attitude?
Yeah, I again, this is going to be working hand in hand with your HR and your recruiting team. A lot of people copy and paste job descriptions. Maybe now you're having generative AI write it for you. But really think about, as you just asked, really think about what is the minimum requirement that someone would need technically to do this role. And, when you put 5 years of experience, think, boy, if they had 4 years, could they still do it then? What if they had 3 years? Could they do it then? And start to think about lowering your requirements. And that's also going to open up the talent pool to you and give you more opportunity to see people who have the right potential. Because if you set those standards really high or make that list really long, the number of candidates that you get will be short, and the chances that those people will have great potential is lower. So you want to cast a wider net so you can get more opportunities to meet more diverse people and a diverse talent pool.
Yeah, I completely agree. It seems like half the challenges I have as a recruiter are there's just not enough people with all the skills that the client wants to hire.
Yes.
A good example would be like ISO lead auditors in the US, and especially ones that work for a certification body. There's only a handful. There's maybe 100 people that are ISO lead auditors working for a certification body that have done certifications. And if that's a hard requirement and they can't be an internal ISO auditor, or implementer, you've cut your talent pool in a small fraction of what it could be. Exactly. And the chances that those 100 people are going to be either interested in working for you or available or whatever it is, and when you distill it down to the number of people that will respond to an in-mail or respond to a call from a recruiter. It's a much smaller number. And then of that number, you have to divide it again, the number of people that are actually going to interview well. So you have to look at not just what the overall talent pool looks like, but once you narrow it down to the number of people that they're actually going to be hired, it's a very, very small number. So any recruiter out there knows this, that you need to make 200 contacts to get 40 people to respond, to get 5 people on the phone, to get 2 interviews, to get 1 person hired, that sort of thing.
Yep. And it works the same way in the opposite way if you're looking for a job. You might have to look at 400 jobs and meet with 80 recruiters and do 40 interviews, to get 1 job offer. So it's the same kind of thing. You're absolutely right. And when you're the one writing those job requirements, you need to keep all of those steps in mind. Because if you're writing really high job requirements, the chances that you're going to get to the bottom of that pyramid and get the right person is slim. So the bigger you can open that up, the more chances you have to get the right person.
Yeah, and a best practice would be if you're starting to search for a new person that you want to hire, especially somebody senior that may have some niche skills, ask your recruiter to do a preliminary search with your requirements. Whatever the hard skills are. Say, go out and, search LinkedIn or search a job board, see who's out there, and then let's look at it together. If there's 500 people, probably good starting place. It'd be better if there were a couple thousand. But if there's 20, you have a problem and you need to adjust somehow. And I don't think anybody really does that, but it would be so illuminating just to see the totality of the market of skills. Which kind of brings me to another point. You really narrow your talent pool by geographic area, and that happens quite often. I built a SOC for one client. They're an MSSP in Dallas, and I had to look for people that were local. I ended up with a total talent pool of about 2,000 people, and I contacted every single one that looked suitable. And of those, we got 3 people hired. So I said, in order to get another 10 people hired like you want, we're going to have to reach out to how many more thousands of people, and those people just don't exist in Dallas. So what are your thoughts on the whole, RTO thing, or, the remote versus hybrid debate?
Well, so first of all, the RTO thing, that is a challenging thing. And a lot of people are seeing that as a benefit now, right? So if you can offer remote work, people like that, and they're used to that throughout the pandemic. You talked about geographic location. One of the wonderful things about working at Nestle for so many years is that we were able to build talented teams all over the world. So we had teams all in Latin America. We had teams in North America and Europe and Asia. And the great thing was some of those areas became kind of talent pools to move people to other locations, because a lot of people wanted to work in Europe or wanted to work in the United States. So, you bring up these people from really entry-level roles, and they work their way up through the organization. Then at some point you say, boy, I'd really love to put, Steve over in this area, or I'd like to put Susie over in this area. And so it was a great way to create that talent pipeline and that talent pool. Now, one challenge that you mentioned in your example is a SOC. And a lot of times a SOC requires that people be on site in that location. And that's one of the reasons that many people outsource their SOCs, is because it's very difficult to hire a bunch of SOC analysts in one physical location. So that is really a challenge there. But I think as much as we can open up, and that's another aperture that you can open up when you're talking about hiring for talent, is if you can say, I want to hire anybody in North America or anybody in the world for this role, that opens up the number of available candidates and gives you that much more opportunity to find the right person with the right potential to go for the role. And by the way, because of currency differences, you may end up hiring someone who's really, really talented, and it might cost you 20% or 50% of what it costs you in the US to hire resources. I would use that justification all the time at Nestle to say, we've got an open role here in the United States. If I close this position in the United States and open it up in Argentina, I can hire 3 people with the same level of talent as I can hire 1 person for in the United States for the same amount of money. So if you're looking to save money and increase the size and the talent in your team, that's a great way to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And even within the US, folks in, say, KC are going to be much cheaper, relatively speaking, to folks located in the bigger metro areas.
Yeah.
Even some of the tech companies these days, it seems like they're still pretty focused on hiring people in New York or San Francisco, where the cost of living is much higher, and thus people almost have to ask for higher salaries. I think that's changing a little bit, but with folks moving. But any other challenges that you've encountered over the years in hiring, and anything that's recurring?
Yeah. So, one of the things that happens, and I talked before about the position in the US. So as a hiring manager, in order to get an additional headcount to be able to hire someone, it's a big struggle, right? And so you have to put business justification. You got to get sign off from the CIO and the CFO and whoever. There's all kinds of committees and stuff for approving additional headcount. Such a challenge. And that's a lot of reasons I mentioned before why people sometimes go for a tool instead of a person, because it's a lot easier to get financial approval for a tool versus a headcount. So once you finally get that golden ticket, okay, you got approval for an additional headcount, a lot of times people are afraid at that point to use that golden ticket to bring in an entry-level resource. Because now you finally got approval. Well, I'm going to get this unicorn architect, ISO lead auditor, IoT security specialist, cloud architect to do everything. I'm going to hire that person, that unicorn that doesn't exist. So I think that's one of the challenges that we have in terms of working with our business. And if you can help people to understand that, boy, if I could bring in 2 or 3 entry-level people, it would cost the same amount as money as a unicorn person, and I could have that much more potential and that much more talent for the future, and give people opportunities to move up the ladder in their career and learn and grow. And so it's a hard discussion to have, but again, it involves working with your financial team, with your HR team, and helping them to understand the benefits of bringing in entry-level people.
Yeah, and I would imagine it helps a lot in those discussions to have everything documented. If you have a good foundational, body of knowledge around each job description, each job title, exactly which responsibilities everybody has, not something that's kind of canned and just been cobbled together by HR, but actually writing out what every single person is doing and figuring out your promotion pathways too. Yeah. Okay, so this person has these responsibilities, check, 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 check. They've done all these things, but here are the other ones that they're missing that they would need to get to the next level. And that's a way to figure out what people need to advance. And you're able to sort of catalog the skills that you have currently on your team. And then you can create a list of skills that you don't have on your team. And if you can, delegate some of those responsibilities, like you said, down to the rest of the folks, you're able to maybe remove some of the requirements that's this hole in your team of, what you need this new person to do. Because I think that's often what happens when you have all of these requirements. It's because in an ideal world, somebody would be able to do all these things because that's all the gaps we have on our team as far as knowledge goes. There's other ways to get that knowledge, but it takes longer. It's much easier, I guess, if you can just hire somebody into that role. So I guess that goes back to the education point and training.
Yeah, I mentored a lot of people, not only in cyber, but in IT in general. And what you said about having that job catalog and that job description is such a key part of the mentoring. So the first thing I do is I have them, lay out, okay, what is your ideal next role? And then what you want to do is you want to get a job description or a job advertisement or whatever for that role. And then we go through and look at all of those requirements. And then we say, okay, how good are you t-shirt size on each of these things? Oh, I'm amazing at this. I need a lot of work on this. I'm okay at this. And then that helps us to create kind of a development plan. And then say, in terms of soft skills and technical skills, what are the things that you need to work on between now and a year from now or whatever to build up so that you're ready to have that. And when you bring someone in, and I love that you said, you can't just have a canned thing from HR. If you're a leader, you really need to invest some time to make sure that you have good job descriptions, good roles, good progressive paths for your team to know what's next, because that's another huge part of talent retention is people knowing what's next for them. It might not be this year or next year, but 2 to 3 to 5 years down the road, what are the things that I'm training? What are I'm going to get another degree, whatever it is, to get me ready for that next role. And seeing that light at the end of the tunnel makes people want to stay and want to contribute and be part of the growing and changing team.
Yeah, I'm big on transparency in business in general, and especially when it comes to career development. You have to give somebody a path. You have to give somebody something to shoot for. If they don't know what's next, they have nothing to drive towards, and their motivation goes out the window. Every employee has their own motivators. For some people, it might be flexibility for their family. For some people, it might be that promotion. For some people, might be more money, which is, I think, actually less common than people think. Once
recognition.
You get recognition, yep. What are your thoughts on the motivators? Like, how do you keep track of that in your employee base and make sure that your environment is meeting their motivators so they don't just go and switch jobs all the time?
Well, as you very eloquently put in your question, every person has different things that motivate them. And maybe some people have a mix of things, and some people will actually be offended or upset by some types of motivation. Like if you publicly recognize someone who's very introverted, they might hate that. So I think the key thing is to understand what motivates each of the diverse individuals in your team and make sure that you are using those motivational things for those people. Now, that doesn't mean only give a raise to one person and not to another, but focus on, look, we're giving you this raise because of this excellent job that you did here, and I just want to recognize you for that. So make sure that you use all of those different tools that you have, promotions, raises, public recognition, whatever other kind of praise and things that people want and desire, family flexibility you talked about, and reward the people the way they want to be rewarded. And they will recognize that and see that. That's a huge part of empathy as a leader, to understand what motivates people and help to reward them in that way.
Yeah, I could see somebody listening to this and they might say, well, that all sounds great. If you do have budget to give somebody that raise, or you do have the spot on your team to be able to promote that person, what do you do with that employee where you know what their motivator is and you're not able to give it to them? Any solutions there?
Yeah, well, I talked before about the two jobs of a leader, one being, helping people advance in their careers, which is part of this, and the other one being removing roadblocks. And so I think that's where you as a leader need to go to bat with your organization, whether it's finance, HR, higher leadership, whatever it is, to say, look, the cost of going and rehiring someone for this role is going to be so much more than the cost of giving this person a 5% raise. So we need to find a way to do it. We need to find another lever that we can pull, that we can do this, because retaining people, even though it seems like today it costs money to pay that 5%, the amount that you're going to have to pay to recruit a brand new person is going to be much more than retaining that talented person that you have. So find a way to get the money as a leader. That's your job.
Yeah, fair enough. And I would imagine data would help a lot in presenting that business case.
Transparency of data is such an amazing way. I'll tell you an interesting story, Pete, about transparency of data. So during the pandemic, we shifted from using a lean operating model to a DevOps model, or DevSecOps. And part of the reason that we did that is the team came to me and said, hey, we want to do this. And I said, okay, but we need to be able to answer 3 questions. So we created these things that we called the 3 golden questions. The first one is, if someone comes to us with a new requirement or a new thing for us to do, can we do that now with the current resources that we have? And today in our lean operating model, we could not answer that question. But tomorrow with this new DevOps model, we could see, okay, Jim is working on this project. He's going to finish it in February. He can start working on this thing then. So if we can't do it now, and could we do this thing in the near future? That's the second question. So when is someone going to roll off and be available for that project? But the kicker, the third part of the golden question is, if we can't do it now and we can't do it in the near future, what thing can we stop doing in order to start doing this new activity? So in the past, when people would come to the security team and say, hey, we need you to work on this thing, we would just say yes, and we'd figure it out, and people would be working 120% or whatever to try to deliver all of this stuff. But what we started doing is we started saying no, but we started saying no with data, right? To say, we can't do that now because these are the things that we're working on and the team is tapped out. Now, if you'd like to choose one of these things that we can either delay or stop doing or cancel doing altogether, we can reallocate those resources to work on this new thing. And it became something that not only the security team did, but many of the other teams within IT started adopting the same methodology because they were able to. The idea is not to say no. The idea is to let the business make informed decisions about how they want to allocate the resources to the priorities that they have. So I love that, using data to answer questions. Great thing.
Absolutely. What about throughout your career? Obviously, you care very much about the management of the folks that you do in career development and things like that. Can you think of a couple success stories that you mentored somebody and they end up going on to do bigger and better things either on your team or elsewhere?
Yeah, I think there's two stories that I want to tell. I'll start with Bob. So Bob came in, we knew that we needed to go to the cloud, and we knew that we needed to do that in a secure way. So we hired Bob. Bob was the cloud security architect for Lufthansa Airlines. So we brought him in, and at the time, like Microsoft and Google and Amazon, they would give you free cloud security training, but it's like an intern who comes in for 2 or 3 days and reads through a bunch of slides. It's not the same as someone who has been there and done that and created the policies. So I got my golden ticket. I hired Bob. But instead of bringing Bob in and saying, okay, Bob, you're the cloud security architect, you go figure all this out, I said, I want you to spend half of your time beginning to construct the cloud security architecture. We called it freedom in a box. But with the other half of your time, I want you to build an army of Bobs. Because I know that 6 months from now, a year from now, this thing is going to blow up. And we're going to be doing this in multiple other hyperscalers, and we're going to need a bunch of people who can do what you do. So it was great because he really loved both of those things, and the team loved learning from him and being able to build up their skill sets and get certifications and training and all these different things that he was teaching them. And by the end of the year, we had 11 Bobs. And so we were able to really respond to the demand that we had. And we got an award from the CIO of Nestle for our work, creating this whole plan, and not only with the security team, but with data team and IT infrastructure and all these other teams together. So that was a really great success story. And Bob has gone on to be a security architect at other companies and really successful. But probably my favorite success story in terms of mentoring and growing is Leandra. So Leandra worked for the service desk in Brazil. I mentioned about using Latin America as a talent pipeline before. And I was down there, and she said, hey, I'd love to, have 15 minutes to chat with you. I'm really interested in cybersecurity. So, okay, great. I'm happy to talk to anybody who's crazy enough to be interested in cybersecurity. So we talked for a little while, and she told me what she was interested in. She told me what her background was. I gave her some ideas of courses she could take and certs and things like that she could go through. And so she started working on that stuff. And about 6 months later, I opened up a position in Brazil. And I noticed that she didn't apply for the position. So I contacted her. I said, hey, I know you said you were interested, and I've got this position. So far, I'm only getting external candidates. I'd love to have an internal candidate to balance it out. I saw that you didn't apply. And she said, well, it's a senior analyst role, and I'm only an analyst. I said, well, let's just give it a shot. So we gave it a shot, and she blew the other candidates, external candidates who had much more experience in cybersecurity, but she blew everybody out of the water. My boss at the time called me and he said, you'd be crazy if you don't hire this girl. I said, okay, great. So I hired her. And then a little while later, we opened up a specialist role. So I hired her in as a senior analyst, and same kind of story, and I said, hey, we got this other role, you want to go for this? Oh, but it's a specialist job and I'm just a senior. You know what? Let's go for it again. So same kind of thing, very easy to promote her into that role. And then she told me, she said, look, Andrew, I want to move to Europe. This is a real dream of mine. And I see there's a role there. But again, it's above my role. It's a senior specialist role. How can I possibly go and get that? I said, well, let's look at the job description. Let's look at the gaps. Let's create a development plan. And so we did that. We worked through those things. She got certified. She, did some kind of soft skills training and stuff. And then we went ahead and she applied for that role, and I sponsored her for it. It was great. She did really well. Of course, she got hired there. And goes there as a senior specialist. So then probably 2 years later, I had the opportunity to hire a regional security manager for Europe. And I knew she was there. And we had our same phone call that we'd had 2 or 3 times before. And I said, hey, I posted this role. I noticed you haven't. She said, I don't think that I'm qualified for this role. And I said, well, let's think about it. Let's take a look at the job description. Let's look at the gaps. There's not too many gaps. She said, my boss said he's not even qualified for this role. I said, let's go and let's try it. So we did it. And the same thing happened. The guy who was the head of IT for Europe, he called me afterwards. He said, I want Leandra. She's the one. So we hired her. That's the role that she's in today. Within a probably 5 or 6 year period, she went through, 3 or 4 different promotions to a leadership role. She's doing great in that role today. And it's just it's so rewarding as a leader to see your team evolve and advance in that way. It's so special. So those are my two favorite stories. There's many, many more, but I like those. And so those are the ones that I shared with you today.
Those are great. And I think for me, the takeaway is keep an open mind, both as a hiring manager, as kind of we talked about, but also as a candidate or as a current employee who might consider a promotion. I know imposter syndrome is a popular term and a lot of people seem to have it.
Yeah.
But, if there's an opportunity that presents itself, definitely keep an open mind, maybe consider it, think about it. And it can't hurt, I think, to consider these things, even if it doesn't seem like a fit on the surface. And I say the same thing to people that are, relatively happy in their current jobs. It's like you just never know what can come your way if you keep an open mind. But yeah, we're coming up on time here, Andrew. So just one last question that I ask everybody.
Sure.
What would you say we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Well, I've touched on this already. I'm going to hit the same button again. But I think something that we're not talking about enough is apprenticeships. It's a way to get past that needing to have an open headcount. And it's a great way to get entry-level talent, people that are making career changes. A lot of the apprentices that I work with are people that are coming out of the military. A lot of times those people, you already know what kind of potential they have. And so I think it's a great way to tap into a diverse talent pool of people that are really hungry and want to learn and change and grow. I think that's a great way to do things. So if you're not looking at apprenticeships as a talent pipeline today, I highly encourage you to go out and do that. And if you have an internship program, you can probably add to it or change it or make improvements to it, if you will. But I think that's a great talent pool, an untapped talent pool for cybersecurity that we need to get more into.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just the more volume we can get on the front end of getting people into the industry, it's going to whittle down a little bit, but eventually we'll have more people on the senior end that, everybody wants to hire to hire those unicorns. So that's a great point, Andrew. Certainly appreciate your time. If people want to find you online, what's the best way to do so?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. I also have a website. It's called cybersecurityintheboardroom.com. So either one of those are great ways to find me online. Happy to help anybody who's, as I said, crazy enough to want to get into cybersecurity. So wish you luck.
Well, that's great. Thanks for your time, Andrew, and thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate you having me.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.